Yeah. So Pete Burridge, athletic performance coach here in the UK, working for Bristol Bears Rugby Club. Worked in a lot of different environments. Leicester Tigers Rugby Club previously, Leicester City Football Club, and Tottenham Football Club, and worked at Exeter Uni in the UK as well. So, been doing this now for just over 10 years.
Okay, cool. So, since last time we talked, I get a new team, which is like a rugby team. And there's a lot of times I need to like train them like sprinting, especially for like team sport athlete. It's hard for me to like get them into like the 45-degree angle or like more like lower degree. How would you manage to be like train your athlete to like the lower body angle, like piston, like foot action?
Yeah, so dependent on the athletes you're working with, it's going to depend on the strategy that you employ. But yeah, to accelerate well, you're going to have to be in a pretty good projective position, which is, like you said, is the ideal position is 45 degrees, before, and then transitioning into nice front side mechanics at upright running. But as we know, not all athletes are capable of that. So the strategies that you might employ to try and overload that might be some resisted sprinting. It could be through drilling, just to get them to understand, feel that what that position feels like. So things like wall drills, the basic A marches and A skips and things like that, can understand the cyclical action of running as it transitions to upright. Things like prowler pushes is going to help, again, getting that piston-like action, attacking back down to the ground. I'm a big fan of resisted sprinting, whether that's through as simple as banded, to pulling a sled, to pulling a run rocket or a 1080 or whatever piece of equipment that you've got. Again, if you're really pushed for equipment, sometimes old school Rocky style, just pulling a tire is going to kind of constrain you to get into more of a projective position, into some deeper shin angles, deeper torso angles that you're going to want to hopefully accelerate better.
So, for resisted sprinting, how would you like program them how would you program it with your speed training? Is it like we do resisted sprint right before you do sprint, or you like do separate days?
So at Bristol at the minute, we kind of bookend the week. So on a Saturday turnaround, but on the Monday, we do our general linear speed training unloaded, where we'll build up towards a max velocity effort, whether that's a timed run of 40 meters through gates, or whether that's a rolling fly 10 max effort where we use the GPS feedback from a percentage of max velocity perspective to get what we want that way. And then on the match day -2, which again on the Saturday turnaround is usually the Thursday, we'll do our resisted speed work in the morning prior to the rugby session. So they'll usually come in post-meeting, they'll do some vertical power work. So they'll do their trap bar jumps, squat jumps, CMJs, Olympic lift variants if they do that. And they'll do that for, say, 15 minutes, trying to move the bar as fast as they can through a variety of different loads. Then they'll come out into our barn and then do some resisted speed work, whether that's on the 1080, the run rocket, banded work, or more technical base work like some prowler pushes, prowler bounds, or some drilling. But yeah, they'll usually get into anywhere between 2 to 6 efforts of resisted sprinting over somewhere between 5 to 20 meters, with loads completely variant from unloaded all the way up to very heavy loading, where on the run rocket on the high setting at 30 kilos, or on the 1080 or on gear 2 on the max setting, which is like the equivalent of around about 100 kilos plus on the sled, I believe. So again, we're lucky that we've got the equipment that we don't necessarily need to use a sled. But if we were to use a sled in terms of the velocity decrement that we would get, it would be equivalent to around about 110 kilos, I believe, of pulling a sled. So that's pretty damn heavy. And then we'll either use, with the 1080 we get the instantaneous feedback, so we'll get velocity achieved there when they peak out in terms of where they achieve their max speed, which usually is near the end of, say, a 15-meter rep. And then with the run rocket, we'll sometimes use timing gates, and then we'll be able to get a velocity decrement based off of the timing gate time. And so I'll then go into a session with someone and be like, right, okay, I want you at level 20, and a good speed to hit is 3.2 seconds for this distance. Chase the time. And then they're just all 5 or 6 of the reps trying to chase that time, getting under 3.2 seconds. And I've done the work on the front end to understand, okay, what's the velocity decrement that I'm looking for? And then I've picked and kind of individualized someone's load based off of what their capabilities are. So that would be how our resisted speed training works in season. In pre-season, we usually mix the two. So they'll get a resisted speed stimulus alongside some max velocity work in a session that may take 30 to 40 minutes, alongside some more contextual rugby-based speed with where the rugby coaches are involved, but we're actively kind of helping and constraining the session and the number of defenders and the space and the distances and the time afforded to them and things like that.
Cool. So for like resisted sprinting, you just mentioned you're gonna go like 100 kilo or like 110 kilo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for those athletes, and for that, like it's like really heavy, are they really able to like sprint?
Ish, yeah. So like on our highest setting on the 1080, we've got guys achieving 6 meters per second after 15 meters. So again, that's not top speeds, but that's not what you're trying to develop there. Again, if you're wanting to work max velocity, then work at max velocity, whereas you do resisted speed training, especially at the heavy lows, to develop the first couple steps of acceleration. And so you're getting them, like, again, if you think of a unloaded acceleration, you maybe get 1 or 2 strides to practice that high force contraction before you move too fast, because you're already upright running and you're moving at such high velocities that you can't actually really tear the turf where you've got so much force into the ground. Whereas when you load someone heavy, that 1 to 2 strides of that skill becomes 7, 8, 9. So you're getting almost quadruple the amount of practice at accelerating with a heavy load for the 1 rep that you do. So that's why I really like resisted sprinting to assist acceleration based.
Cool. So besides the body angle and the shin angle, is there like anything you're gonna look at when you train acceleration? Is it like go on.
The first things first is that the shin angle and the torso angle are important kinematics, but the most important thing is to run fast. You got to put force into the ground. So you can have pretty pictures and you can kind of tip tap and toe the floor, but you've got to rip that foot down into the ground and have a lot of force into the ground. You got to be aware of the kinetics, not just the kinematics. So you've got to be aware that there needs to be a ton of force laid down into the ground. And so that's where, in my coaching eye, I'm looking at their shin angle, I'm looking at their torso angle, I'm looking, are they attacking that foot back to the ground and are they stiff on that foot contact? But are their hips traveling forwards in space? That's the most important thing to running fast. And so that's that mixture between the technical side and then more the mechanical side. So it's not just about having, let's say, the best driver, so you've got good technique. It's about having a big engine as well in your car. Like you can have an F1 driver driving the car, but if you've only got like a 1 liter electric car, to drive, unfortunately, even if you've got a crap driver, but he's got a 5-liter Dodge Charger, he's still going to beat you in a race. So you've got to factor in both sides. And that's where, again, some players within your group need to work on the driver. They need to work on the technique and learning how their body moves in space to get the right technique to allow themselves to move fast. And other guys just need to work on the engine so they can get into good positions, but they can't lay any force down. So sometimes with those players, actually, what they need is maybe more based in the gym, or they don't have good mass-specific forces. So it perhaps might be that they're actually carrying around 10 kilos of fat that isn't helping them go forwards. And so actually their best speed coach might actually be their nutritionist, and losing that 10 kilos of fat might be the best thing that they can do to make them faster, regardless of what technique coaching you're doing or sprinting work you're doing. Sometimes it might just be get them to eat less, and you'll see improvements.
That was true. But how was the more body fat you gain, how is it going to affect the acceleration phase?
So the easiest thing to think of is if you're accelerating and you time yourself over 10 meters, let's say you run pedestrian time 1.7 of 10-meter time, and then I asked you to run with a backpack with 10 kilos on, your time will get slower 100%, because that 10 kilos isn't helping you go forwards anymore. If that's 10 kilos of muscle, especially if it's in specific areas that are going to help you project yourself forwards. So again, if that's 10 kilos of muscle in your glutes, your hamstrings, and those sorts of pieces, okay, actually being heavier might help you accelerate better. But like usual, it depends where that mass is. And so again, if I'm coaching a track sprinter, I probably would want them on the lighter side, because at the end of the day, all they need to do is run in a straight line. They don't have any collisions or anything like that. So they need all of their mass as much as they can in their lower body, with some in their upper body to control the rotational forces. Whereas when I'm working with a rugby player where, okay, they need to sprint in a straight line, but they also need to have mass for momentum going into collisions, into contact and things like that. Actually, it might be better, even though they might not be able to accelerate as fast, carrying 3-4 kilos extra might help them in the contact area so that they start winning collisions. And that's where, for rugby players, at least, and American footballers and contact-based sports, it's not necessarily just about their 10-meter time. It might be about their sprint momentum. So, and the momentum that they carry going into that 10 meters. So the best example is if I'm 100 kilos and you're 150 kilos and both of us run at 1.7 meters per second, I'd much rather tackle me than you at 150 kilos. So that's an easy way of putting it across. So sometimes for rugby players, you might actually sacrifice a little bit of acceleration for a lot more mass so that they can be more dominant in collision. It depends, but it depends on the task that they're being that they're faced with in their sports.
True. So for like acceleration, you'll be looking at body angle, foot angle, and the hip projection, hip displacement, right?
Yeah.
So how about like when you coach max velocity, is there anything you're gonna look at, like foot strike or like the pelvis position?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm looking at is their pelvic position, because that's going to dictate the amount of front side lift that they get. So running with good front side mechanics overall is usually better for injury prevention and better for performance. So the pelvic position dictates that. So again, if you've got poor pelvic position with the pelvis anteriorly rotated, so again, if you put your hands on your hips and you rotate your hips forwards, the amount of front side lift you're going to get is a lot less than if you posteriorly pelvic tilt your hips. The amount that you're able to draw that hammer up high to whack the ground is going to be miles and miles different. So again, understanding that, moving dynamically at top speeds and being able to control those forces and control what's going on around your hips is going to be super important to achieving the techniques that we want to run fast. It starts with the pelvis. So I'm looking at the pelvis that then leads to the front side lift. So that's where the thigh comes up to, where it blocks. So ideally you want that as high as you can usually. And then the torso position, which is then going to dictate whereabouts do they leave their hips behind, which then can affect if they cast out and land too far out in front of their center of mass, which again is their foot strike. And then another key thing is how relaxed they are. So again, I work with rugby players where a lot of their solutions to most movement problems is more and more force, more and more strain. So you'll see them, they got loads of tension in their neck, loads of tension in their shoulders, but that's going to limit some of the positions that they're going to get into and predispose them to more injuries. So one of the things that we cue our guys is how fast can you run while staying relaxed? So a thing that I'm looking for is, again, upper body silent where their lower body is violent. So their lower body is still whacking the ground really, really hard, but in their upper body, they're nice and chilled, relaxed, no tension in the system where possible. So technically, from my coaching eye, that's the things that I'm looking for and the things that I'm trying to cue. And the ways that I go about doing that, obviously sprinting is the most specific tool that you can use, but then there's certain kinds of drills you can do, things like wickets, dribbles, dribble bleeds, straight leg scissor drills are quite good that bleed into max velocity, and something simple, just like rolling efforts, fly tens, things like that, where you're taking out the harshness of the acceleration. You're asking them, just build your speed up however slowly you want to go, but then within this zone, I want you to light up and I want you to run as fast as you can while staying relaxed. And getting them lots and lots of reps of that is going to be good in terms of layering some of those technical cues that you want and them getting mastery of that skill, which it is at the end of the day. Running fast with good technique is a skill that not many of us possess.
So you mentioned more than once, like stay relaxed. So why is it so important to be like stay relaxed?
So when they tense up, you're going to lose that pelvic position. You're going to get more strain. You're going to start overreaching, which again, if you think about the foot strike, if they've got tension and they're overreaching, they're going to flick up out the back again, which is then going to limit the time that they have. If your foot's behind you, you've got to get that foot back through and then into an upright position to whack down to the ground, which if it's too far behind you, with the time that it takes to get that left foot on the ground and get that right foot back to the floor, you're not going to be able to get that front thigh lift, which is then going to limit the amount of time to get pre-tension to hit the ground, which is reduce the forces that you put into the ground. Plus also, again, if you're casting out, there's a lot more load going through your hamstrings, which again, we don't want. And that's going to predispose you to hamstring injuries, which we definitely don't want.
So, since you brought up like hamstring injury, besides hamstring injury, is there like any common injury that happens with like rugby teams?
Other than concussion, which may or may not be preventable, hamstring and calf injuries are probably our big two. Which, again, we're always trying to manage where possible. So we're big on making sure the hamstrings are strong at long muscle lengths. Similarly for the calves, not just the gastroc, but the soleus as well. So what that looks like is not just straight leg calf raises, but bent knee calf raises, working a variety of loads. So their max peak force plus their capacity. So high reps, low reps. Hamstrings wise, we'll RDL, we'll Nordic. We'll work at long muscle lengths where possible. We'll do some eccentric based work. We'll do some isometric based work, just trying to tick off across the whole spectrum of loads to bulletproof those hamstrings where possible. Give them a regular exposure and dose of max velocity. So give them the speed vaccine. So we'll use our GPS to make sure that ideally we're above 90% of max velocity at least once a week, ideally higher than that, because the hamstring activation goes up exponentially the higher to your max velocity you are. So if you run at 85% of your max speed, the amount of activation of your hamstrings compared to running at 92% is a lot different. And then from 92% to 95%, again, is a lot different. So getting them close to their max velocities regularly and giving them a regular dose helps provide a protective effect. And then just the basic load management of understanding how much high-speed running they're doing, managing their stress load, managing other kind of tertiary loads. So, and if they're in meetings a lot, like understanding their back health and how that might set them off neurally, which then might shut them down in their hamstrings or their calves, which can then lead to calf injuries or hamstring injuries. So yoga is a big part of our program, making sure that we take care of that. And we open guys up a little bit there. So making sure that guys are prepped before we ask them to run fast, because you can't just go from a 1 hour meeting into a max velocity effort. You got to build up to get there, and you got to do the prep work. So that's how we try and prevent injuries. Obviously, we still get them, but yeah, we do our best to try and put everything in place to prevent them, to keep our guys on the field.
Besides like yoga or like some sort of technology use, is there like anything you're gonna do to like maybe like injury prevention or like recovery side of thing?
Yeah, so we will have recovery methodologies, but like we stress that more from being able to back up the training load rather than from an injury prevention perspective. Like, we don't want to oversell the benefits of saunas or ice baths or compression, because the link towards injury prevention is slim at best in the research. So we'll try and chase the big rocks. So again, we'll test guys and work out, are they deficient in their calf strength? And then we'll like aggressively try and chase that through strength training. Again, similarly from their hamstring strength. So we might use, so we've got a Nord board, so we'll be able to check left-right discrepancies, and we can use normative values if someone's fairly low. From a calf perspective, we've got a force plate, so we can test isometrically there. And again, we're trying to chase like single leg at least 2 times body weight if we can. And then guys that are low down, again, trying to maybe be a bit more aggressive with how we chase that up from a strength capacity perspective. And then making sure that they get a specific stimulus. So max velocity running, sprinting, changing direction load. For our kickers, managing groin injuries, it's making sure we manage their kicking load. They're getting enough kicking load, but not too much. All just basic injury prevention strategies, really, of just making sure you're across many, many things. Try not to spike their loads where someone goes from no training load to massive amounts. So for the guys that maybe aren't involved in the squad, they're picking up extras to keep their dose of training high. And then those guys who maybe are out of the squad and then all of a sudden back into the squad, we might have to restrict them or manage them through training just to build their loads up in a smart kind of smooth fashion. So it's stepwise rather than it being a big spike that obviously increases their injury risk.
So you mentioned like calf strength, right? So besides injury prevention wise, like calf or like the ankle, so important for like in the like speed training?
Yeah. So like we probably haven't done too much ankle specific work, but at the same time, like the analogy that you can't run a Ferrari on flat tires. So it doesn't matter like how much force you lay into the ground if through your quads and your glutes, if when the rubber hits the road, you've got a flat tire and you're like dissipating loads of force through that ankle. So with those kinds of guys, we'll try and attack that through specific means. So sprint skill, like teaching them to be stiff on foot contact and get that pre-tension before they hit the ground. Or it could be more of a general sense. So that's where we'll do plyos. And I know it's something on my radar. We haven't really done too much of it, but I know JB Moran's spoken a fair bit around foot and foot-specific training. That might be some things that we might look into a little bit more as we go into our preseason. Perhaps even doing some barefoot work, maybe in our low-level drills, just getting some exposure to, again, getting pre-tension, controlling and stabilizing through that foot so that we can, be efficient with all the force that we're generating in our prime movers, in our quads, in our glutes, in our hamstrings, so that gets actually transferred into the ground.
So there's a lot of like coaches who coach speed or like teach speed that talks about like pre-tension. why is like pre-tension so important?
So pre-tension, like the easiest way to think about it is if you're climbing up a set of stairs and you trip over because you didn't see the stair coming and you fall over. Well, what's gone on there? Well, the floors hit you almost before your body's been ready for it. So you don't have that pre-tension going into that foot strike. So then you hit the floor soft and your body has to rely on a reflex to generate force to then catch yourself. Otherwise, you're going to fall over. So you think of sprinting, it's basically a set of multiple strides of that same skill. But because the floor's flat, you know when the floor's coming because you've sprinted so many times. You understand the cadence of when that foot's hitting the ground. So you can generate pre-tension through that Achilles, through that calf, through that hamstring to generate force before you hit the ground. And as Ken Clark and guys like that have shown, again, getting the big spike of force into the ground in that early stages of ground contact is linked with better performance in terms of when it comes to sprint times and sprint techniques. So if you can get that, then you're going to run faster. So yeah, anything you can do to generate that pre-tension is going to be good. Again, there's argument for certain ways of doing it. So like, again, I know that the Franz Bosch guys, the influence guys like Bas van Horen spoken about like muscle slack, and we should be training the hamstrings isometrically because that's a better way of getting co-contractions to take that muscle slack out of the system so that you can be more projective and fast. I'm undecided whether that's the way about going about it, but at the same time, I think we're all trying to get to the same endpoint, but we're perhaps just speaking different languages. So I feel from a pre-tension perspective, it's just understanding how your limbs move in space and understanding basically your stride cadence and frequency, and understanding when to start switching on those muscles to get that big peak in ground reaction force, which I think comes from the Franz Bosch type guys speak about these adaptations being very specific coordinative adaptations, which to me, the most specific skill for sprinting is sprinting. So I think sprint training should pretty much take care of that as a whole. And that should be the main strategy if you believe that pre-tension is something that someone needs to work on. Well, give them a larger dose of sprint training so that they understand how to generate those big spikes in ground reaction forces while sprinting, rather than doing, say, a gym-based exercise to take the slack out of the system. I'm not sure how much that transfers. Don't get me wrong, some drills like that and some hip lock drills and basic kind of more traditional track-based drills to get that front side position are all going to be good to help layer on that learning and understand the positions and the speeds and the forces that someone needs to put into the floor. But I don't think there's any substitute for maximal intent sprint training. So that's really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, I believe. And some people would disagree with me, but that's where my head's at with when it comes to pre-tension and muscle slack and things like that.
Cool. So how about things like I want to ask about your thoughts on like hip lock. What exactly is hip lock? Because like there's a lot of like coaches teaches this, and why should we teach hip lock?
So again, I wouldn't profess to be an expert on some of, again, it's come from Franz Bosch and the guys that work under his sort of teachings, and I feel a lot of the things that he's saying jive with my philosophies when it comes to sprint training, but it's just come from it's almost like a different language. So like a few of his key things are hip lock, swing leg retraction, foot plant from above. Well, foot plant from above is a high front side position. Yeah, same thing, just different language. Hip lock is running with your hips tall and being able to be stiff on ground contact and have very little deformation so that we've got good kind of reactive contact. So that's being reactive. Hip lock and reactivity are the same thing, just different words. And then that swing leg retraction is from that front side lift position, getting that foot to retract back to the ground or whip from the hip. So again, I'll cue whip from the hip a lot, while swing leg retraction is the same thing. It's just a different way of going about it. So I think sometimes we can get lost in that, when in reality we're saying a lot of the same things. In terms of the methodology to train it, like, I wouldn't be someone that tends to use aqua bags that much and perturbation type training, because I think, especially with the athletes that I work with, a lot of the basics is going to take care of a lot of what I want anyway. So rather than add some instability to the movement, I would rather someone just get very, very good at doing a dribble, or very, very good at running wickets, or a med ball knee punch run, or something like that, where they're going to get hip lock positions anyway, rather than putting an aqua bag on their back, maybe going at a sub-max intensity because of the instability of it. And okay, it looks good for Instagram, but I'm not sold on how much extra performance gain that's going to give us above and beyond some of the basic drills that, again, the track coaches of old have been doing for years and years and years.
Yeah, same here. I prefer like doing more of the basic stuff and just let my athlete like sprint, do some max velocity sprinting.
Yeah. Exactly. That's going to be the biggest teaching tool, and setting up the environment to make sure that you get guys to run with maximal intent when they are sprinting is going to be half the battle. And then you can dive deeper into the kinematics and how they move and how you cue them to do things. But just getting them to run fast will give you half of your results, regardless of if you're even coaching it. So just giving them that regular dose of sprint training is going to give you a lot of the performance benefits, regardless of if you even coach it. And then, taking it to the next level is then looking at what someone needs, how you cue it, and then maybe giving someone a little bit more of this or a little less of that, and then picking a drill that fits them. So like when we cue guys in the gym, you use one cue, you might get that light bulb moment straight away. For 3 other guys, they don't know what you're talking about, and you have to cycle through those cues. Similarly, in a speed setting, with cues or with drills, the drills just help provide that context to what you want when the whole skill's together, when you're actually sprinting. The drills help, but at the end of the day, that sprint stimulus needs to take up most of the training pie when it comes to sprint training.
So we talk a lot about like sprinting, but when we're in like team sport, when we train team sport athlete, there's also going to be a lot of like deceleration, right? So did you like program the deceleration with the linear speed there, or you just put in multi-directional speed there?
I usually put it in multi-directional speed because the guys get a lot of that in the games that they play in training and things like that. But on reflection of this year, I think maybe we could have touched upon some of the basics of deceleration training a little bit more. And that's something in preseason next season we're hoping to do, just to get the basics of how do they drop their hip height, how do they bleed off their speed, and just being a little bit more aware of what their body's doing in space, rather than just letting the games take care of everything and they get loads of exposure to the stimulus, but they might be getting loads of exposure of poorly performed deceleration stimulus. So we'll hope to touch upon a little bit more of that next season if we can. That will probably be paired with some of our linear acceleration work. And at the end of the day, you can be quite efficient with your stimulus there, because if you're moving fast, at some point you're going to have to decelerate. So why not pair the two together? So let's say you're doing a 15-meter acceleration. Why not add a grid for them to decelerate in, and then challenge them? Okay, I want you to run as fast as you can for that 50 meters through, whether you're racing to a pole or through gates or whatever it is. But then now there's a set of cones laid out, and I need you to stop at the earliest possible cone. So you're actually challenging hard decelerations. You've added a constraint in that, okay, they don't just bleed off their speed and just carry on running for 20 odd meters. They're actually being challenged to stop on a dime in 10 meters or 5 meters, and you're just taking away that space over time, so that you're making that stimulus harder and harder and harder to cope with. Would be how I would do it.
Is there like anything you look or anything you saw in past the season, so like make you change the way you're going to program the deceleration?
Not necessarily. Like, I think we get a lot of it in our like agility-based training, where we maybe don't coach specifically the deceleration mechanics. We're maybe coaching a little bit more of the decision-making, perception, action coupling, what their eyes are seeing, the movement strategies that they pick, rather than, okay, to decelerate, I need you to get into X, Y position. But yeah, we might be maybe a little bit more specific, a little bit more explicit with teaching them the position they are going to be better able to perform the skill in. So again, in our drills where we're doing one-on-ones, that might be where I spend a little bit more time coaching the defender rather than the attacker, because the defender needs to decelerate to control their feet to react to where the attacker goes. So that would be whereas maybe last season I spent most of my time with the attacker with trying to use some deception and like getting that foot outside the body to then accelerate, getting a good chin angle to accelerate out. I might actually be spending more of my time next season coaching the defender in, can they close that space early, but then control their feet so they're in a good position to react. And then you've got a good kind of platform to coach. Okay, if you're really, really high, you're not going to be able to react off and get into a good position. So actually you need to drop your hip height earlier. How do you do that? Right, you're going to put your foot further out in front of you and almost sit back into your deceleration a little bit more. And then you can then be in a good position to then re-accelerate into the tackle or into the hit. So yeah, things like that would be where I think I'd spend more of my time going into next year from a deceleration perspective, at least.
Cool. That's kind of like all the questions I have for today, okay?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry for the tech problem, for the internet problem, and it cost more time than I thought. I'm really sorry. But last thing is like really important, because the last conversation we did, there's actually a lot of like coaches in town really love it. So that's one of the reasons we kind of like try to manage the second time. So is there like, if there's like any coaches are interested in what you're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
So the best place is probably on my Twitter. So I'm fairly active on Twitter, which is at Pete Burridge. So yeah, reach out to me there, or drop me a message on there, and I'll reply. And then yeah, if people want a deeper chat or talk, then yeah, hook me up on there, and I can send out my email to you. And then yeah, we can talk a little bit more in depth. But yeah, Twitter's probably the best place to get me, which is at Pete Burridge.
Cool. Really appreciate it. Sorry, man.
It's all good. Ironic that we were talking about tech and how it's the human in front of us, and then the tech decides to break down. Maybe it was listening to us at the time.
Probably next time.
Nice.
Appreciate it.
Nice. Yeah, good to chat again.